would urge the Vatican to be very careful about their connections with China. China is the leading force of totalitarianism and atheism in the world today. This is a godless, totalitarian regime in the same way that the Soviet Union was. Where is Pope Francis standing up against today's totalitarianism and today's godlessness, the march of which continues on in the over-secularization of Western society? Putin's, his Rasputin is Alexander Dugin. And he constantly talks about this phrase, strategic neutralization. He wants Americans to be full of discord, anger, division, and chaos. That's what the Russian interference operations are all about in the United States. This division, this insurrectionist revolutionary arm of American politics that Antifa represents, it serves the interests of Russia and China.
Hello dear viewers, this is Ivan Belostenko for Against Tide TV, each pod prompt from Lublin, Poland. Thank you for joining us again. We have a very special guest with us, Jack Posobiec from OANN American News Network. Hello Jack, thank you for being with us.
Hi Ivan, thanks so much for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Same here. Thank you for joining us and taking this time to have a chat. You are the current correspondent for OANN American News Network. But also in 2016, you've been the Special Projects Director for Citizens for Trump, one of the biggest grassroots movement for Trump in the previous elections. And you're also a veteran officer in the Navy Intelligence, have been there for 7 years. The author of 2 books, For the Warfare, a Doctrine for a New Generation of Politics, and also the recent one, Citizens for Trump, the inside story of the people's movement to take back America. So thank you once again for being with us and for taking time to speak with us.
No, I'm always happy to come on as a, as an American with Polish heritage. I'm always happy to come on to shows in Poland to remember, where I came from, what my heritage is. And I've always been proud of that Polish heritage.
It's a shame we can have you here in studio, or at least in some form of live interaction due to this Chinese CCP virus pandemic. But hopefully,
yeah, well, thanks to the CCP, they're cutting us all apart. But hopefully we'll beat the CCP, we'll beat their virus, and I'll be able to come over back to Poland very soon.
So let me first start with a topic that recently, in everybody's minds, the recent elections in Poland. President Duda have won them, but I want to focus back to the Polish diaspora in the States. Do you think, following President Trump help to President Duda winning the elections in Poland, the polls in United States would help President Trump win the 2020 election?
Well, I think there's definitely an area of the Polish diaspora where they see the connection, the strong relationship between President Duda and President Trump. That's definitely something that they view as not even political, but it's something where it's a strategic geopolitical alliance between, this is international relations, right? And this is creating a new international norm where the United States and Poland enjoy a strong relationship. Now, obviously, that had been in the norm in the past, but it was not the norm under Barack Obama, who turned America really away from Poland and turned in terms of European policy and turned more towards Ukraine in some senses, but also to Germany and Angela Merkel. And so with Trump going back to Poland, looking at we're now seeing the transfer of military troops, army troops from Germany. They're going to Poland. We're seeing the agreements like the 3 Cs initiative, and we're also seeing the increase of economic relationship in regards to LNG and the sales between the U.S. and Poland and throughout Central and Eastern Europe. This is going to be a massive boom for the Polish people, for Eastern Europe, for Central Europe, and they understand that President Trump is a huge part of that. He's actually spearheading this, sending his Secretary of State over, Mike Pompeo, pledging $1 billion to the 3 Cs initiative. And so I think for Poles in the diaspora here in the United States, if they are concerned with this, they're looking at that relationship. They're seeing how strong America has stood with Poland. They're seeing, of course, they remember that incredible speech that President Trump gave in Warsaw right in 2017 at the beginning of his presidency. That wasn't a political speech. It wasn't left or right. It was a speech in defense of our heritage, in defense of our civilization, and in defense of our shared goals, the goals of liberty, the goals of freedom, and the goals of free practice of religion.
You mentioned the switch from Germany more towards Poland and the 3C initiatives. I want to ask you about Russia, switching topics here slightly. Russia, from what we can see, clearly interfered in the U.S. elections, and I don't mean in the way your mainstream media portrays it with Trump and the Russiagate, but more of interference to go ahead and talk about that. And can you tell us how do you think Russia interfered in your elections, and why did they do it?
Well, Russia's goal for the United States is strategic. And he constantly talks about this phrase, strategic neutralization. He wants Americans to be full of discord, anger, division, and chaos. That's what the Russian interference operations are all about in the United States. And so every time you see this division in the U.S., and we are divided right now, we see this friction, this plays into their hands. So it plays into what they want, it plays into their goals, because if the U.S. is not working on the world stage, then Russia is able to come in and fill that power vacuum. And China is also allowed to come in and fill that power vacuum. So it plays into their interests as we see Russia moving to become more of a belligerent regional power. And then we also see China attempting to usurp the global order and to replace it and remake it in their own model. And so when you see things like the 3 Cs initiative, that of course becomes a bulwark not just to the economic influence of China, but also to the economic and energy influence of Russia. Remember, of course, it's Russian gas prices and gas diplomacy and influence that they held over Central and Eastern Europe for such a long time. And it's been the United States under Donald Trump that's actually undercutting this. And by the way, this is actually something that started before Trump. It predated Trump coming into office, the rise of LNG, which comes from fracking and shale in the United States. So it's been something that had actually predated him, but when he got into office, he green-lighted it, spearheaded it, and accelerated this program because he understood the strategic, both military, political, and economic relationship that the United States could have with Central and Eastern Europe.
It's quite interesting. In our media and the commentators here, they often tell the sort of one-side story of Trump being friendly to Putin, Russia. What are your thoughts on this? Is he friendly, or what's behind this friendliness and this trying to?
Well, I do think that the president has looked at Russia, and he's talked about bringing Russia back from they were excised from the G7. They want to bring it back into the G8. This is similar to Reagan's policy of sitting down and rapprochement with Gorbachev in the 1980s. They had the Reykjavik summit in Iceland. They had multiple summits. I think he understands that as a businessman, he's coming to it from the perspective of you're not going to change Russia, you're not going to remove Russia, so you might as well talk to them. You saw him do this with Kim Jong-un and the North Koreans. That doesn't necessarily mean that you trust them or that you're making an alliance with them, but that you understand that you have your vested interests and they have their vested interests. So it's in everyone's good interest in terms of world peace and in terms of security that you're having that kind of open dialogue and open communication. Communication does not mean capitulation. It doesn't mean friendliness. It means you are working together to potentially make a deal that's better for all parties, including your own special interest, that being the interest of the American people and the free world.
I want to come back to China for a moment there, because you mentioned, you sort of intermentioned Russia and China. Can you tell us about the current relationship of America and China now following this pandemic? Has it damaged the relationship? Is there a way of coming back to the previous more good or bad, more to speak, relationship, or is it damaged for good?
Yes, the Chinese coronavirus has brought U.S. and China relations to their lowest point in 20 years. This is the type of relations that we saw between the U.S. and China from the 1990s on. This is probably, it's not quite on the level of Tiananmen Square, certainly, but it's got people reminded of the fact that this is the same Chinese regime that perpetuated the Tiananmen Square. massacre, the same Chinese regime that took back Hong Kong and then took away their freedoms, the same Chinese regime that perpetuated the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, some of the great tragedies of communism, the great tragedies of the 20th century, that they have not reformed themselves. Yes, they've liberalized their economy in bringing in foreign direct investment and bringing in American dollars and Western dollars. And of course, American companies have been all too happy to be compliant with that because, of course, cheap labor and exploitation of the people in China can lead to greater profit margins for the United States. Also, in terms of what we've seen in medicine and pharmaceuticals, when so much of it is being made in China, not manufactured in the United States anymore, that becomes a national security issue when you have a pandemic like was caused just recently and is still going on from the Chinese coronavirus. And so what we saw China do with their failed mask diplomacy, when we learned that the mask diplomacy was actually a cover for their buyback programs to try to sell us our own masks, the N95 masks, that they stockpiled early on in this when they were giving bad information to the WHO and in some cases giving no information to the WHO, covering up this outbreak from the start, arresting doctors. This is the same Chinese regime, and I really think that people are now looking behind the curtain. The mask is off in a sense, even though our masks are on in the pandemic, and they're starting to see China for who they really are. Xi Jinping, and he's someone that I actually had the opportunity to meet once when I was working in Shanghai years ago. He is definitely someone who has attempted to form a cult of personality around him. But I do think that that cult of personality is backfiring because people realize that he is the one that is at the head of this entire oligarchy there in the Chinese regime.
Let's focus back on the elections. What will happen in your mind, in your view, if Sleepy Biden or perhaps some other Democratic candidate wins the 2020 race? What will this do to American-Polish relationship? Will that
Well, the
get better or
idea
worse?
is you've got two competing views of international relations that are coming forward. You have realpolitik of Donald Trump and the American First movement, or you have the liberal institutional version of international politics of Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, George W. Bush, Colin Powell. That is the type of international system that they want to go back to. So you're going to see if Joe Biden does become president or someone from his camp replaces him and becomes president, which is a strong rumor that's been out there, you are going to see a reversion of American geopolitical efforts. You're going to see a turn from Warsaw to Berlin. You're going to see the EU relationship with the United States become stronger. You're going to see the United States be willing to be subservient to the United Nations, to not stand up for itself, and to really lower itself down. Remember, in the Barack Obama administration, that's when I was an intelligence officer, that's what I was in, we constantly heard these refrains of America's managed decline, or America is the fallen superpower. America is an empire in decline. These were the refrains of the Barack Obama's form of foreign policy, and that is what we would go back to in Joe Biden or really any other candidate from his team that would become president.
How would they reflect on the relationship of U.S. with China if Biden or any other Democrat win?
Yes, it would be returned back to the status quo. Remember, Biden, under the Obama administration, was in charge of the China account, as it were. He was also in charge of the Ukraine account. And so it was his goal to go over to China, and as he did multiple times, appearing with Xi Jinping. And at one point he said, the rise of China is good for America. The rise of China will be good for American workers and the American economy. Of course, we've seen the effects of that, and we've seen the truth and the consequences of those policies. Joe Biden has never repudiated those statements. He's never looked back on or reflected on his own record of 40 years in the United States government. He's been a senator for a very long time, since the 1980s. He then became the vice president. He was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a very powerful seat in that committee. So Joe Biden is responsible for America allowing and financing the rise of China for the entire time. That's the type of policy that Joe Biden would turn back to.
Solomon, you have turned Beijing intercourse Joe, saying that we need more more intercourse with China.
Oh, goodness.
Tell me, Jack, I wanted to ask you as well about the fact that, I don't know if you guys have heard about this, the Polish government actually still haven't categorically excluded Huawei or other CCP suppliers from the 5G network infrastructure building. I know the messages are not getting through as clearly as they should. There's many declarations. The Vice President Pence was here and they signed a declaration of ethical suppliers, but still we haven't heard from the Polish government a clear declaration that Huawei or other similar suppliers are not going to be included in the 5G tenders. What do you think will happen with the Polish-American relationship if somehow Huawei or a similar vendor would be allowed to build the 5G network here in Poland?
Well, I would encourage anyone who's looking at Huawei for their intercommunications and telecommunications services for 5G or any other service to understand that Huawei is indelibly tied to the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. This is the Red Army of China under a new name that they've had since the founding of the People's Republic. This is an agency that is directly tied with Chinese military services, Chinese national security services, and Chinese intelligence services. So their ability to not only just track your phones and steal your data, but to also intercept your communications, the communications of your families and the communications of government officials, business officials, commercial secrets, espionage secrets. This will all be open for the Chinese. This is essentially like saying, do you want the KGB to set up your telephone network? That's what you're saying when you're asking Huawei to set up your 5G.
Mm-hmm. Well, we hope this clear message will get to government and other people who influence these decisions. I want to come back to Russia and China. You sort of interlink between them and ask you about the BLM and Antifa protests. You took part in some of them as well as a reporter and been attacked. Do you think these protests, this Black Lives Matter and Antifa protests, are spontaneous, or do you think they might be sponsored by the likes of Russia and China?
Well, you mentioned when I was attacked recently by Antifa at a protest where I was standing up in defense of the statue of Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln, one of our greatest presidents. And I really want to say thank you to all of my Polish supporters out there that came forward and stood with me in that event. There was a hashtag, TalkJack, and it went viral throughout all of Poland. And when that took place, I did a number of interviews at the time. And I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart that, here I am, someone on the other side of the world, but so many people and Polish patriots stood up for me in that time. And I really want to say thank you so much, because it was a trying time for us. When you come under attack for standing up for what's right, when you come under attack for doing your job, my job as a reporter is protected by the First Amendment here in the United States, and criminals and domestic terrorists attempt to interfere and sow that chaos and division. We need to stand up against this, regardless of what your politics are, regardless of what you think of Donald Trump or Joe Biden. This is something that should go beyond that. It really is. And so I just wanted to say thank you and express my gratitude and say God bless to everyone who supported me there. And as far as foreign interference, I did spend 3 days out in Chaz of Seattle. I did spend time at the Antifa protests and Antifa events here in Washington, D.C. And while we cannot definitively say that there is foreign interference in these, I would go back to what I said at the beginning of this interview. This division, this insurrectionist revolutionary arm of American politics, that Antifa represents, it serves the interests of Russia and China, because as they seek to weaken America on the world stage, Antifa seeks to usurp and revolt against America here in our own domestic backyard. That is the threat that they pose. That is their goal. They don't support Republicans. They don't support Democrats. They support anarchy and violent revolution. That is who they are. And so those that would benefit from that do include America's foreign adversaries.
And of course, the founding members of BLM themselves confirmed that they are trained Marxists.
Yes, you can actually go, and I've gone and looked at their blog, their website, and you can find not only support for raising funds for abortion, but also a glowing eulogy that the BLM organization put together for Fidel Castro, the communist dictator of Cuba, when he died in 2016. And so you have to understand that this organization stands for something that I think is radically different than the simple police reforms that most people think it does.
Let's jump back to Europe and to Vatican. Huawei is sponsoring a conference in the Vatican under the One Nation, One Planet initiative about global influence in education. And we also had Elma Yuan, recently a Hong Kong businessman, on our television, shedding some light on the connection of Vatican and CCP. Also, Greta Thunberg is going to be on that conference. So, what are your thoughts about this CCP influence on the Vatican? You have been vocal on Twitter criticizing the Pope, and at the same time, you also state that you're a Catholic. How do you combine those two things, criticizing the Vatican, the Catholic Church?
As a Catholic, I've been Catholic my whole life. I am a practicing Catholic. My son is baptized Catholic. We go to church whenever we're allowed under this Chinese coronavirus pandemic. But I would urge the Vatican to be very careful about their connections with China. China is the leading force of totalitarianism and atheism in the world today. In the entire world is China. This is a godless, totalitarian regime in the same way that the Soviet Union was. And it was Pope John Paul II that stood up to the Soviet Union towards the end, towards the 1970s, that gave birth to the Solidarity movement. He came to Warsaw. He presided over Mass in Warsaw. Where is Pope Francis, the current Pope, standing up against today's totalitarianism and today's godlessness, the march of which continues on in the over-secularization of Western society? And so I would ask Pope Francis to please stand with the faith that's been under attack. We've had churches burned here in the United States. We've had Catholic saint statues torn down in Turkey. They're reverting the Christian church, the Hagia Sophia, back into a mosque. This is something Erdogan is doing. And so I understand that Pope Francis did express his regret for this, but I would encourage him to stand up to these illiberal forces, to stand up to these atheist forces, because his role is that of the Pope, the leader of our faith. And I would encourage him to defend us when we're facing so many threats from outside.
We in our television have started a campaign to support Donald Trump after the hate he received visiting the St. John's Church in Washington, holding up a Bible. So we invite our viewers to join that action as well, and hashtag Christians for USA, Christians for Trump.
For USA, I love it.
Yeah, so please do, if you want to. You can also join us, Jack, in this campaign and share it on Twitter with your followers as well. To finish up, I want to ask you a personal question about one of your tweets. I know you quite often tweet about Jesus and your faith. You've mentioned in one of your tweets something I can quote: "Admit that you're a sinner, that you need God's help. Be willing to change your mind and turn from your sin. Believe that Jesus Christ died for you, was buried, and rose from the dead. Ask Jesus into your heart and to become your personal Lord and Savior." Can you just briefly expand on what you mean in those few words?
Well, I mean in terms of that, where I've been blessed in this world to have a Twitter account and have a social media platform that's given me the ability to spread a lot of messages to the world. And it's given me a platform that I really didn't expect to have. I initially signed up for Twitter just so I could spend time while I was on deployment in the military, just something to do and talk about TV shows and movies. And now here I am with this incredible platform and so many wonderful followers. I've been retweeted by the president a number of times, and I appreciate him for that. And so going back to my Catholic faith, going back to my roots, when I think about how I'd like to use this platform to do good in the world, and how I would like to use this platform to spread anything that I can, whether you call it digital evangelism or not, it's Christ tells us in the Bible to spread the good news. And so even though I'm more known for commenting on politics or commenting on pop culture, I do try to do as much as I can to spread that good news to the world, and hopefully that that word will fall on fertile ground, on fertile soil, and that people will look to it and understand that even in this world that we live in that's full of nihilism, postmodernism, secularism, to understand that the faith is still there, that God is still there, that Christ is still there. And if you choose to accept him, and if you choose to come back to the church, if you choose to come back to the faith, that you will always be welcomed with open arms.
Jack Posobiec, thank you very much for being with us today and for sharing this amazing insight. Anything you want to share with our Polish viewers before we finish up here?
Oh, no, I just say that stay strong, Poland. The United States stands with you. You have stood against the forces of fascism, communism, and imperialism time and time again. Poland was partitioned, Poland was occupied, but Poland never failed. Poland never quit, and Poland never surrendered. And I say thank you to everyone in Poland today that continues to keep that spirit alive, that has kept the Polish people alive for the entire history. Thank you.
Thank you much, Jack. And we also thank our American friends, and Poland, of course, stands with US. Thank you very much for being with us and for sharing this information.
Thanks so much.
Jack Posobiec, correspondent and host for ONE American News Network. Thank you for being with us. My name was Ivan Bostenko. This is Against ITV. Till next time, God bless.